So welcome back to the channel, something a little bit different with this one, where we're going to do a diorama with a vintage kit. Try and do this one as it's taking off from the ground. So this is a re-release of a pretty old kit from Airfix. I think it's sort of 1960s or 70s, the first release. And basically you just get updated decals. It's even the original instructions in here, which you'll see in a minute. The decals are very nice, it's worth it for that alone. And this just sort of grabbed me. I was in a hobby shop and saw it, it just come out, and I thought, well, that would make a good video. Build it in the kind of vintage way, not really worry about seam lines and all that sort of thing, although I did do my best to eliminate them in this, and then they came back at the end with ghost seams, so there you go. We'll just get the kit out of the bag here, and you can see that it's very much the vintage sort of thing, but there's an interesting model there amongst it all. Quite a lot of flash and some heavy raised panel lines, which I do try and get rid of. But curiously, the pilots are extremely detailed, more so than they are in some of the more modern releases, so make of that what you will. See a bit of flash there on the undercarriage. But all in all, pretty good. Hawker Demon being one of those interwar biplanes made out of the whole group, like the Hawker Fury and the Hart Osprey, all very similar, and just with a few different things on each variant. There's some nasty ejector pin marks there on the underside of the wing, which we need to take care of. So here I am removing the stuff from the sprue here and making the most of the soft plastic that Airfix has supplied this kit in. And as you can see, just straight off, it's not a bad joint there for such an old kit. Nothing too bad, so a little bit of clean up here and there and we'll be well away. I noticed this was quite a large sprue gate there connecting that wing, so instead of using the clippers just to get it off, I thought I'd get all the small parts off first, expose it as a large piece of sprue, and then just cut it away. That seemed to be the safest way to go about it, otherwise could have caused a bit of damage to the part there, which is relatively thin. So you've got to be careful with these sort of things. Always good to try and plan ahead with these types of builds. And once all that's done, it's just a case of getting rid of some of this burring and the ejector pins. So starting with those, I've used super glue just to do the initial filling and make it nice and, well, dry quick basically, so I can get on with it, and then just sanded it back there and tried to keep the grooves for the fabric effect there that's going on, and that was all rather effective. And as I mentioned, there's some burring around the outside of the wing, so to get rid of that, it's back to the trusty Infinity sanding sticks. And just a quick swipe of those around the outside clears that up quite quickly. Again, as I say, it is very soft plastic, so it does go quite quickly with all of this, so you don't need to be too heavy. And looking at the grit number here, we got 1000, which is not very aggressive, and it came off really quite fast. For the parts where the wing goes in a little bit and we've got some heavier plastic, I just used some thinner sanding sticks, the Flory range. And now it's time to try and get rid of those raised panels on the side there. I don't think they really add anything, and as we're going to put decals along there, I figured that if we actually get rid of it and just put in some of the fabric detail there, that would probably be just as good. So just with a sharp hobby knife, just scrape away the soft plastic. Again, we've got a theme running through this one, and it comes off very quickly. And then just try and scrape in some of the grooves there to give it just a slight effect of the fabric. Now you can see that all came off really quite quickly, no problem there. And then just sand that in with some sanding sticks, smooth it all out. So once that's all smoothed out, it's time to go on to the propeller, which I actually wanted to keep spinning for the pictures at the end, but unfortunately it sort of spins most of the way and then slows up on one side, so it doesn't actually work, which is annoying, but there you go. It's in there. Now just gluing the fuselage halves together using trusty Tamiya extra thin, and that wicks along the join, which is really good. This is the quick setting version. which I just prefer. I find it goes off really quick. It's very much like the normal one. Tailplane section going on here as well, which is again a straightforward join. It's just straight through the horizontal stabilizers for the fin and rudder, and it all joins up. You push it in nice and tight and it joins together. A bit of a difficult thing to clamp, but it works. Lower wing going on again, and for the age of the kit, as you can see, it just holds in there. There is a little bit of a gap, but I did clamp it and it was fine. Now this is a bit that I did edit. Those exhaust mounts actually stuck out quite a lot wider than that, so I cut them down so that they moved in nicely. Then the undercarriage, it's time for that, and that's just 3 pieces together with the main bar running along the middle, keeping it all together. A little bit precarious here is the way I'm doing it, but it works. It's just using the Tamiya extra thin to get it to tack together, and then with super glue actually fix it to the underside of the fuselage, and it works. It's relatively successful by doing it this way. Just making sure it's all tacked together and that it's not going to fall apart as I pick it up, which is often happens with these sort of things. So just clamping it in there, this is where super glue is very effective. That's where the forward points are, because you wouldn't be able to do that very easily with plastic cement. You'd have to stand there for quite a while holding it, and it's not really feasible. So getting those front portions tacked in with super glue and then bringing the rear parts up to the bottom of the fuselage is the way to go about that. Then the top wings glued on, just using the outside main struts, and then the cabane struts are fixed with plastic glue, which gives them some, it means they're movable, so I just got to bring the top wing down a bit and then fix those cabane struts in with super glue at each point. Just hold it there, sets off nicely, and then it was a good strong join. The wing is actually slightly off if you look at it from above, and I checked from above with the shape of the wing afterwards, but I was trying to get it all sorted from the front on and neglected that it's actually kinked a little bit if you look at it from directly above, but you know, you can't do too much about these things in these type of builds. Just got the stuff there for the aerial wire, so that's the mounting points. Glued those on, and I've used a bit of metal rod at the back as well for the struts for the tailplane, just to make life easier, because the plastic was a bit soft and it didn't really fit the way it should. And the main construction of the model is completed here. So next up it's looking at the pilots, and again you can see the detail there, so I'm going to add those as I say, we're going to be doing a diorama here, so just getting them prepped as well as we go to the painting stage. And then thinking about the base. So what I've done here is drilled some holes, measured for the width of the wheels, and put a couple small bits of tubing glued into the base there so that the wheels sit on that, and it's quite effective. I wanted it to be a little bit more upright than what it sits, but the plane joins with the holes in the wheels. I probably should have had the holes a bit further forward to lift it front heavy a little bit more. As you can see, it's just a little bit tail heavy, but that's the idea. And this is just a test bed really. Once it's glued at the end, it's a little bit more in the angle that I want, but quite effective, just holding itself up there. So I skipped the painting stage because it's literally just yellow on the wheels and just painted everything silver. I've used a whole mix of metallizers from the lacquer range, so some of the new Mr. Colour silvers, some of the MRP silvers, a whole load of stuff just to try and get some shine at the front and a bit more matte at the back. And then it's time for the decals, which go on really well. Typical new Airfix decals. They seem to be getting better with every release, every year that goes on. They used to be quite matte, and now they seem to be quite a lot more shiny, which is good. Makes the application a little bit easier. They don't seem to hold up so much. They flow a little bit more on the surface. And nice colourful scheme. So we've got that bar going right across the top of the upper wing. So that's what I show you here. I won't talk you through this. You can just enjoy the placement of this and me manoeuvring it into the final position. So once the decals are all on, and I've used micro set and sol, and they're all set in just how I want, I've masked up the front cowling section to leave it shiny, and sprayed the rest of the model with a matte varnish, just the straight Tamiya matte varnish. It's not my matte of choice, but I've run out of everything else, and that's all I had. So that's XF86, just mixed with some Mr. Hobby Rapid Thinner. It's not quite as stark as it should be. When you look at period photographs, the definition between the painted fabric surface and the bare metal at the front is quite strong, but it's good enough. I've made an attempt, which is all we need to do here. I'm quite happy with it. Hand painted quite a lot of bits as well around the wheels, the propeller, and again, all in the same vein as it being a kind of vintage build, not worrying too much about making things accurate, but trying to do things cleanly and to a more sort of modern standard, I guess. I think that shows with the metal paint more than anything. So then onto the base, I've sprayed black around the outside that you can still see through the brown a little bit, masked the edge up, and then sprayed brown on top. Just checking again, can't help myself, keep seeing how it's looking. Now everything's sort of coming together and painted up, starting to get the idea. And here you can see I've corrected the level, it's close enough. I suppose if it was right up at the angle I'm looking for, at a right angle, it would almost be taking off. So this is probably exactly how it should be. So I'm pretty happy with that. And of course, because I've painted the base, it's now stuck in the wheels. So a little bit of trouble getting it off there, but of course, the magic of the camera, you don't see that. Now adding the exhaust, what I noticed here is that front cabane strut actually fouls it, and that's why it sticks out so much, I guess, is to get around that. So something's gone a bit wrong there in the design. Nevertheless, with a bit of clamping, it does bend the cabane strut in, but you've really got to look for it to see it. Once that's joined in, it's perfectly acceptable. I thought I'd do some basic rigging on this as well, so just using the Ushi superfine thread and just doing the main bits of rigging. Didn't worry about anything else going down to the tailplane, so joined it in on the cabane struts and then going down onto the main struts. Using super glue, as soon as it touches it, it pretty much sets, but you can guarantee if you're rushing it or things aren't going right, it just never sets. So if you have problems with this, just put it all down, make a cup of tea, come back, and you'll find it'll all work correctly. Also wanted to make the windscreen, so I've got some plastic out of the scrap and just cut that and make the windscreen around the front. And that is just simply measuring it by eye, again not worrying about anything too detailed, not getting bogged down in the details. It's quite nice to have builds like this, I find, these days, when we've got quite a lot of in-depth detailed builds. To actually have something like this is a nice change. You let your hair down a little bit, more relaxing. And there we go. Now that rear section behind the pilot was there in the reference pictures, but unfortunately it's not there in my final pictures because it fell off somewhere. I've never seen it again, but it did go on, and there's the video proof for it. It's, again, little refinements like this just add a little bit to the model. So now it's time to get the base done, and nothing fancy here, just watered down PVA glue and painted that on liberally to give a nice covering. You could have probably done this, you could have given it 2 coats of this PVA, I think, because it is a little bit sparse when we get to the end, but nevertheless it's okay. And a tip I learnt here through trial and error is actually do the flocking inside a container, because if you do it on the bench it goes everywhere. When you've got it in the container, it is obviously contained, and that makes for life a lot easier, and you also don't waste so much. If you've got a funnel, you can just tip it back into the pot at the end. So that's what I've learned over the Christmas period, where I've been doing the odd few bases. This is just static grass from the Railway Modelers stuff, just basic stuff off the shelf. So pick something that you like the look of. This just looked like the summer grass colour in England to me. And what I found curious here is that after tapping all of this off, it actually sat up really well, so I didn't have to get a static applicator or anything. It seemed to just do it naturally, which surprised me. I thought it was going to be pretty flat, but it's not. So I was really quite impressed with that. It looks the part, as far as I'm concerned. And while the PVA glue is still wet, it is advisable to peel off the masking, because it will just peel nicely, as opposed to when it's actually dried. It can sometimes tear it a little bit, so you want to try and avoid that. You want a nice clean demarcation line between the grass area and the base, and you'll get something like this. And then this was something I was thinking about a lot. I wanted to give some compression to the grass from the wheels of the aircraft, so I had a spare wheel lying around which was more or less the same thickness, and just ran that back from the points where the model is going to be positioned on the pipes, tubing, and then actually measured the distance between the two wheels, because I had gone out a little bit using the model, and then from there I was able to straighten up what the actual lines needed to be to get them in the right position, and then that made it a lot more effective. And I was quite surprised. You'll see on camera just how well this stands out. I didn't think it was going to be noticeable, but here you can start to see that the two lines are obviously there, and it gives the effect I wanted. And this is me just being a bit over the top here, I've got to be honest, getting a bit carried away with myself. Spreading, tapping the model down just to give the right distance, and then trace that back in again. This is all whilst the glue is still wet, so the PVA hasn't dried. This is almost within half an hour of me putting that flock on. And then I left it to dry overnight, and there you can see the effect. And then just a bit of detail on the model itself, using a Flory wash, dark dirt wash. Very simple stuff. It's just a clay wash. You put it on and it wipes right off, and then just stays in the recesses. Perfect for this type of project. Just gives a little bit of definition, and I felt it was a bit too bland without this, so just did the effect I wanted, and I was quite happy with that. And also, these washes hide quite a lot of sins that you can get along the build, which is a poor demarcation line between the rubber and the silver on the wheels, because I'd hand painted it, so this righted that. Hand painted the figures, again nothing special, just using some Citadel paints from the Games Workshop range, just a whole load of colours and washes just to make it look right. You're not going to be looking at the figures in detail, as long as they look the part in the glance. As you glance past, that's good. And then super glue the rear pilot in, and just get him leaning back a bit. And I decided to add a scarf as well, which a friend mentioned might be a good idea, and that's just using a thin strip of greaseproof paper. And that's again just giving the feel of the momentum forward. And it's actually quite effective, I thought. Because we haven't got a spinning propeller or moving wheels or anything, you need to try and get the idea of the movement, and that all goes to adding to it. So that brings the build to an end. So I'll leave you with some music and the pictures of the final project. And as usual, if you like what you've seen, please consider giving the video a like. Hit subscribe if you want to see more from the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. And let me know in the comments below what you think about the build. If you'd like to see things like this in the future, that would be great.